Okay, so we're going to dive into Chapter 8.
Yes.
PPE. I know you guys are excited. We'll get through it. All right. Okay, respiratory protection. Why is that important for us? You got to breathe to live. We have to breathe to live. It's an important component that the body needs, is that nourishment, the oxygen. How?
Inhalation hazards.
Yeah. So describe that a little more. Inhalation hazard or common. Why are they common at HazMat incidents?
Usually there's something in the atmosphere as a result of vaporization.
Okay. So of the three substances, solid, liquid, and gas or vapor, which one is the safest?
Solid.
Solid. As long as it's in a pile, it's not aerosolized or out in the atmosphere. Inhalation or vapors are hazardous because of the inhalation hazard, because they can be toxic not only to your respiratory system but through absorption. And then what about liquid?
The gases that come off of them.
Yeah, depending on the amount of vapor coming off of that liquid. And then certainly if we got the liquid on us, but in a general sense, it's the vapors associated with the liquid and the vapors when a substance is in the vapor phase. Okay. In this video, I don't know if the sound is on.
It looks like it.
Is it just stealing of Santa's Christmas presents?
Shaking.
I didn't get shown which one of these was the power button.
No red button on the road.
You need a light?
I got one.
You might want to plug some of it for the tree, I suppose.
Red button.
So I don't see anything.
Very bottom right.
Oh, this? Okay. There we go.
Good?
I was looking at the wrong sheet.
Apex, North Carolina, October 5th, 2006. A resident happened to drive by the Environmental Quality Company hazardous waste transfer facility shortly after one of the storage bays caught fire. He called 911.
You can actually see the haze and then real strong smell. Okay.
Firefighters from the Apex Fire Department and other jurisdictions responded. Flames spread quickly, burning through the roof and causing numerous 55-gallon drums of waste to burst, sending fireballs hundreds of feet into the air. As the fire spread, an unknown chemical haze began to drift over the town. But the plant manager was unable to tell the fire chief exactly what chemicals were stored at the facility.
He said, but I can tell you generally what's in there. You got large quantities of flammables, combustibles, oxidizers, pesticides, poisons, contaminated lead, contaminated mercury. The only thing I think left out of the 9 classifications was miscellaneous.
Okay, bad deal for us as responders. And so we're in the mindset maybe of when we respond, what are we going to? What do they get called to? Structure fire, right? What does that turn out to be down the road? Major HazMat incident, and the smoke associated with that. So in this case, they knew it was at a chemical facility. So I don't know if there was, but do we need to be pre-planning or having the vision to think about what's going to happen with the smoke and where is it going to go?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And are we going to have to protect in place? Are we going to have to evacuate? If we are, what does that look like? Is this a level 1, a level 2, or a level 3 incident? Level 3 for sure. We're gonna wanna call for help early and often?
Right away.
Absolutely. Are we gonna wanna take intervention on the fire?
No.
Probably not.
Maybe, depends. Do we have the resources? What do we usually use for fires? Water. It's cheap, right? Readily available. What's the problem with water in this case? You don't know if it's reactive. Small point. The bigger point is that water isn't all gonna sit in there. You're probably gonna create a swimming pool, and that pool's gonna start to float out, or flow out. And once it flows out, we have to be aware of and concerned of the runoff. And where's the runoff going? Is it going into storm sewers? Right? Keep it clean, we're all downstream. Make sense? Different types of SCBAs, I shouldn't say SCBAs, different types of respiratory protection. Closed circuit and open circuit SCBA. What type of SCBA do we use in the fire service most
Open
often?
circuit.
Open circuit. Does a closed circuit system make sense to everybody?
It's like a rebreather.
Yeah, it's a rebreather, so you're essentially using whatever you exhale, it's just getting scrubbed and reused. An APR is an air purifying respirator. There's 3 types: particulate removing, vapor and gas removing, and then a combination. So what would be an example, when we talk about particulate removing, what does that mean?
Like a dust mask.
Yeah, exactly, a dust mask, okay? It'll remove small, solid particles that are within the air. Maybe some vapor, but that's not what it's intended for. Or some aerosolized liquid, but again, that's not what it's intended for. So vapor and gas removing, what do you think that removes or reduces?
Vapor and gas.
Vapor and gas. How does it do that? Yeah, generally chemically. Most often the substance used is charcoal. And then a combination would be a combination of the two. Okay? What's an example of supplied air respirator?
A tube going to your mask. There.
Yep, a tube going to your mask or some sort of a system. In the fire service, where do we generally see that?
Then you gotta go rescue somebody down a well hole or something.
Systems.
Yep, confined space entry. Okay? And then a powered air purifying respirator. It's essentially an APR but it takes the ambient air and powers it. What's the advantage to that? It's really an end user comfort thing. So it's a little bit, you can have a fresh, shouldn't say fresh, but you can have some air moving in your mask and in your system.
It's positive pressure.
And it's somewhat positive pressure, and that pressure reduces or eliminates fogging. So respiratory protection standards are developed by NIOSH and NFPA. NFPA talks about performance and design requirements. There's a specific NFPA committee and NFPA standard for that. Really the big thing now is that it's CBRN, or chemical, biological, or biologic, radiological, and nuclear. Okay? Minimum requirements for entry in not ideal H, and minimum requirements for use by the general population. What are examples of stuff that the general population might use?
A paint mask.
HEPA filter.
Yeah, some sort of a dust
Spray
mask, a
painting.
HEPA filter, something spray painting. Most of the time, at least in this sense, it's what they would call an escape respirator, which is, for lack of a better term, some sort of a plastic bag that you can see out of with some sort of filter involved in it. It's meant for escape out of a hazardous environment. NFPA 852, minimum requirements for selection, care, and maintenance of open circuit SCBA. 1981 is for the design, performance, testing, and certification of open circuit SCBA. So who focused, what type of air packs do you guys have? Scott, okay. So of these two, which one does Scott care about, and which one do you guys care about? And realistically, we should both care about both.
1981.
But what does Scott care about? Which one do they follow?
1981.
1981. They're designing it, performance testing, and they're certifying their SCBA. Okay. And then the end user for the selection of what type, the care, the maintenance, that falls in NFPA 1852. So then, not to muddy the waters, but who has to get involved? OSHA, because they want to keep the worker safe, okay? Establishes requirements, it's 1910.134. So, who is the one that says you have to have a clean shaven face generally for an air pass? OSHA. Okay. Do we talked about the OSHA thing, are we an OSHA state?
No.
No, but do we follow this?
Yep.
Yeah, it's federal OSHA, and even though it may not apply to state and local municipalities, that is the best standard practice of care, so to speak, and that's what we follow. I don't think I need to talk about how an SCBA can be the most important or why it is in the fire service. Why are only positive pressure, open circuit, or closed circuit SCBAs allowed at HazMat incidents, do you think? And to some degree, that's maybe not completely true.
Positive pressure in the mask helps prevent the vapors or gas
Yeah.
or substances from getting within
Yeah.
respirators.
Let me quantify that. When I say that's not necessarily true, I'm talking about APRs. That we need to separate that from air packs. But do we need positive pressure or negative pressure, or does it matter?
If you have a leak or a break in the seal, having positive pressure will get things flowing out instead of flowing in.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that in decon. But positive pressure, in theory, if you have any holes in the system, especially around your face area, should push air out or pressure out, not allowing anything in. Now, could there be a point when something on the outside has more pressure to come in? Sure. But in general, the pressure is enough to keep anything out. So negative pressure would be where it's on demand. As we suck in, we're getting air. The problem with that is if there's anything that comes into our mask seal, we can be inhaling that as well. Okay, so air purifying respirators. They remove specific contaminants. So on the side of the APR, on the side of the canister, it will say what it's good for. So what does that mean for us as the user? What do we have to know what the
You have to know
hazard
what
is?
the hazard is, so you have the right filter.
Yeah, we have to know what the hazard is. It can't be an unknown. Can we use it on like an unknown substance call? It's a bad idea if it's a gas or a vapor, maybe even a liquid. Can we use it on a solid? Sure, we could use a particulate mask. Okay, so the substance plays into it. All right, vapor and gas removing. We've talked about that and how that generally occurs on the chemical level, and then a combination of the two. The respirator, however, will it protect against absorption?
No.
No, because it's only protecting
No.
the airway.
Does SCBA protect against absorption?
No.
Only right here. It does through the eyes, through the nose, and these are some sensitive areas. They've done some studies, particularly related to cancer, but the highest, where do you think the highest contaminated area is of a firefighter after they come out of a structure fire?
Your neck.
The collar's next.
Yep. It's the connection points. So it's your wrists, your neck, around your helmet, and to a lesser degree around your feet or ankles. And that's primarily because when we're in a fire, we're upright and the contaminants start from the top and push down. Okay? So we've done really well at protecting our respiratory. We don't do as good protecting some of those or thinking about some of the absorption possibilities. And that is why it's important to choose the right and correct PPE. Have to know our hazards present. What are these guys doing here?
Overhaul.
Looks like some sort of overhaul or fire investigation, probably. What would we do in conjunction with this, and what do you guys probably do before you take your air packs off at a fire?
Test the air quality.
Yeah, we check the air with an air monitor. We want to know carbon monoxide, if there's any LELs, hydrogen cyanide perhaps, oxygen level. That's important, we'll talk about that right now. So before we use an APR, what do we need to know that we have enough of in the atmosphere?
Oxygen.
Oxygen, because we require oxygen, right? Okay, I wasn't very good at math in school, but we're gonna do a little math lesson. So, oxygen has to be between 19.5 and 23.5%. And we have to be below our ideal H. Do you guys know what the ideal H is?
Danger to life.
Yeah. You inhale this, you're gonna die. Immediately dangerous to life and health. So how much percentage of oxygen is there in the air?
21.
21, are we sure? 20.9? What do you guys say? Does it matter?
You're making me not so sure.
What do you guys think? Okay. In general, we say it's 20.9, which is okay. Well, I will say in general, we say 21 because we round up. Okay? I'll show you where that becomes an issue. Most stuff in the fire service, we say 20.9. The most literature you find out there, it's actually 20.95. And you'll ask, well, why do we care? We're just trying to ballpark stuff, right? So when we have our gas monitor out, how does that read? On what type of a scale? ppm. Do we know what ppm is?
Parts per million.
Parts per million. So, any math whizzes in here? If we said it was 21, so there's 0.1% between these two, how many parts per million does that equate to? 10,000, okay? So between these two, 10,000 parts per million difference. Well, do we really care about that?
Yeah.
If something else is taking place, then we would.
Displacement,
Yeah.
right? So if our monitor says 20.8, could be a little bit of sensor drift, or maybe our monitor is correct and we have up to 10,000 parts per million of something else that's displacing that oxygen, okay? So if there's 20.9, 21% of oxygen in the air, so let's take it further. So 20.95, so how much?
5,000.
5,000, right?
Yeah, 5,000 parts.
Okay, so how many things have an IDLH below 5,000?
Probably lots.
A whole lot. Hydrogen cyanide is like 15 parts per million, I think. So are we going to pick any of that up with these, with normal monitoring equipment? No. So is it important that we're specific and that we know what we're talking about, and that we don't speak in generalities, at least specifically to HazMat? Yeah. To even break that down further, if there's only 21%, 20.9% of oxygen in the air, what is the rest made up of?
That's what 7% nitrogen.
Yeah. Nitrogen, for my one-track mind, I would say other stuff. That it's important but not super important in this example. But what that speaks to, if we took 20 out of 100%, how, and we converted that to a fraction, how much is that?
1/5.
1/5. So there's 4/5 of other stuff, right? So could that be 40,000 parts per million of other stuff?
Yeah.
Because we have to account for those other 4/5, right?
Right.
So we could have up to 40,000 parts per million of something else.
Isn't that
Going on?
10,000 only point?
Yeah, that's just-
That's 0.1.
That's 0.1.
That's not 80.
So that'd be 400,000.
Yeah, so it'd be
Yeah, that's
I see
different.
what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Told you I wasn't good at math, right?
That's a lot.
Yeah, you could be 100,000 parts per
Yeah.
million, you gotta account for it.
So there's a lot more going on in just these small differences in these numbers. So it's important that we understand what that's telling us, and as long as we have we need the right percentage to breathe, but we also have to think about it in terms of hazardous materials. What else is there? What else is potentially displacing that? And is our monitor accurate? And do we need to trust that, or do we verify that? Okay. Yeah, we should always verify it. Okay? Make sense with the oxygen thing? All right. You can use a half or full face mask piece. What's the advantage to a full face mask?
Protects the eyes as well.
Yeah, it's just integrated eye protection. What's a disadvantage to that, though?
Potentially fog up.
Potentially fog up. And when things fog up for us, what do?
Trip and fall.
There's trips and falls, or we get sick of dealing with it and we take it off. And then we don't have the level of protection that we should have. 95, 99, 99.97. And that's the amount of, that's a percentage of filtration that you can. So N is not resistant to oil, R is resistant to oil, and then P is used when oil or non-oil lubricants are present. The sorbent material that we talked about is generally charcoal. So that's used to target the vapor or the gas in the air. We talked about PAPRs, what we would call them, powered air purifying machine. Who uses PAPRs a lot in hazardous materials? What type of an organization? You don't see them much anymore, but generally the cops use these a lot on meth labs. And a large or big reason for that is the amount of time they would spend in these. So it's just an end user comfort thing.
Can't those ignite fumes in toxic environments? Because they.
Well, it could if it's not intrinsically safe. I mean, it is an electric device, so there is some amount of current running through that device. It's essentially just a electric fan on your back or on your belt. It just sucks in outside air and moves it through.
Okay.
But it has to be in the right percentage.
Yeah.
Has to have somewhat of an ignition source, which it could with the electric component of it. Combined respirators can have more flexibility, extended work duration in hazardous areas. Just talked about that with the meth lab. So supplied air hoods, they're loose fitting, lightweight protection, provides very minimal protection. This is the thing, where you see this most often is in like a decon type of a setting. You don't see this in an offensive or even defensive strategy of operations. It's used a lot in decon, and you can kind of tell it's a less level of protection. Fair enough? So as we get further away from the incident, as we remove more of the hazard from the patient, then we can slowly kind of downgrade whatever our PPE is. Escape respirators are designed for escaping a hot zone. Generally not used by professional responders, and nor should be. It's generally a public use type of a thing to get out of the environment. So what do we use at HazMat WMB incidents? We've just talked about each.
SCBAs.
What likely are we to use in this room?
We use SCBAs.
SCBAs. So respiratory equipment has limitations. We've talked about the vision piece. Everybody in this room should be familiar with that, operating in an air pack in a fire environment. how does it decrease our ability to communicate?
Muffles the sound.
Muffles the sound, makes it harder to speak, makes radio communications a little more difficult. Do you guys know what the, on the side of your Scott mask, what that's for?
Speakeasy.
It's essentially a speaker. There's metal in there and it's supposed to help with your clarity and understanding.
Yeah, but it's usually on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
And bunker gear usually has a radio pocket on the left-hand side.
Makes it a little more difficult, right?
Yeah, it's kind of, they could have thought this out, put it on the
The
left.
two probably didn't talk to each other. What about the increased weight? Yeah, is it manageable from what air packs first were? Yeah. Absolutely. Lightweight materials, used to be steel bottles, they weren't very comfortable frames. So it decreases your mobility. Sometimes with the APR, it's chemical specific. What does that also mean for the APR? If it's chemical specific, you actually have to have that APR. And unless you've pre-planned to know that you might use that APR on a specific incident, that could be costly to have APRs for different types of chemicals. So what is generally cheaper and easier for us in the fire service? We just use an air pack. Okay, so there's a bunch of new technology that isn't necessarily out, but things that are in development. The IAFF is working with different organizations. They have been trying to develop something they call a flat pack for quite a while. And the flat pack is essentially a flexible hose or tube. So if this is your back frame, it has tubes, flexible tubes that run the entire length of the pack, and that's what holds your air. Kevlar wrap type tubing here. I think that stuff in the future will be out, but what drives a lot of that? Safety, meeting the standard, and for the most part, as an end user, is the cost. And until they can drive down the cost or make that standard specific in the industry, probably won't see a lot of that out there. It'll just take time to get into the market and get out. It does reduce or limit your profile, which is much better. It's a lot lighter weight, so it's easier on the body.
Do you happen to know comparisons for amount of air contained within, so it's a time you can use it?
The one that I've seen, or at least the one they were working on, was a 30-minute. It was equivalent to a 30-minute cylinder.
Okay.
So it's
like the
same.
Likely higher pressure.
Yes. And that's the other problem. Financially, if you're going to convert all of your air packs to this system, what else do you have to convert? It's a way to fill them, right? We've talked through all of this about the advantages, disadvantages. Okay. How do we feel about SCBA stuff? I shouldn't say SCBA. Air respiratory protection. Thank you. All right. Let's take 10 minutes or so. We can shut that off. Take a break and we'll dive into PPE and ensembles.